Daniel had always dreamed of living near the water. For years, he worked in a busy city, surrounded by tall buildings, noise, and traffic. But in his heart, he wanted peace, something close to nature. When he finally found a small house in the Lake Hoa community, he felt like he had discovered a hidden treasure. The house was simple, painted in soft white, with a porch that faced the calm blue lake. Every morning, the sound of birds greeted him, and the gentle waves touched the shore. For Daniel, it was perfect. The lake had a special beauty. Around the edges, wild grass grew tall and green, bending softly whenever the wind passed. Some neighbors trimmed their grass short, but Daniel liked the natural way it looked. He believed the tall grass gave the lake character, almost like the lake was wearing a crown of green. Sometimes, he would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the grass move with the water, and he felt at peace. The Lake Hoa community was quiet but very organized. There were rules for almost everything: rules about how tall the grass could be, what color you could paint your door, even rules about where to park your car. Some residents didn't mind. They thought the rules kept the neighborhood clean and beautiful. But for Daniel, some rules felt unnecessary. He believed people should respect nature as it is. At first, Daniel did not think too much about the Hoa. He kept his house neat, his porch swept, and his garden tidy. He liked planting small flowers along the pathway, and neighbors often smiled when they walked by. Children would sometimes wave at him while riding their bikes, and Daniel always waved back. Slowly, he felt like he was becoming part of the community. But there was one person who noticed his tall grass more than anyone else: Karen. She was the Hoa president, a woman known for carrying a clipboard wherever she went. She had sharp eyes that could spot a rule broken from across the street. Karen believed it was her duty to make sure every house followed the Hoa guidelines. To her, rules were rules, and no exceptions were allowed. One sunny afternoon, as Daniel sat on his porch reading a book, he saw Karen walking down the street. Her steps were quick, her eyes focused on the lake behind his house. Daniel didn't think much of it at first. Many people enjoyed walking near the lake. But then he noticed Karen slowing down, staring at the tall grass by his shoreline. She tilted her head, scribbled something on her clipboard, and frowned. Daniel sighed quietly. He had seen her checking on other houses before, reminding neighbors to move trash bins, repaint fences, or trim bushes. He had hoped his peaceful patch of grass would not catch her attention. But deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time. That evening, Daniel thought about the lake and the grass. He remembered reading somewhere that tall shoreline grass was important. It helped stop the soil from washing into the water and kept the lake healthy. Fish and birds depended on it. Cutting it too short could cause damage. That was why he never touched it. To him, it wasn't messy, it was natural. The next morning, as Daniel watered his flowers, he saw Karen again. This time, she walked straight to his house. She didn't smile or greet him. Instead, she looked serious, holding her clipboard tightly. "Good morning," Daniel said politely, setting the watering can aside. Karen nodded but didn't return the smile. "Mr. Daniel," she began, her voice firm, "your grass by the lake is over 6 inches high. That is against the Hoa rules. You need to cut it immediately." Daniel was calm. He had expected this conversation. "The grass is part of the shoreline," he explained gently. "It helps protect the lake. I think it's better if it stays natural." Karen frowned deeply. "Rules are rules. Everyone else has cut their grass to the required length. You must do the same. If you don't, we will have to take further action. Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded and said, I understand your concern. But I don't believe cutting that grass is the right thing for the lake. Karen wrote something on her clipboard again, then turned and walked away without another word. Daniel watched her leave, feeling both uneasy and determined. He knew this was not the end. That night, as the sun set over the lake, Daniel sat on his porch again. The tall grass swayed in the orange glow of evening, and the water reflected the colors of the sky. It was beautiful, peaceful, and natural. Daniel promised himself he would protect it, no matter how many rules stood against him. The lake was more than just a view. To him, it was home. And he would not let anyone take that away. The week after Karen's visit passed slowly. Daniel kept to his routine, watering his flowers in the morning, sitting by the lake in the afternoon, and reading on the porch in the evenings. From a distance, life looked peaceful. But inside, Daniel felt a quiet tension, like a storm waiting to arrive. He knew Karen was not the type of person to let things go easily. Each day, Daniel half expected another visit from her. Sometimes, he saw her walking around the neighborhood, checking lawns, writing notes, and talking to other residents. A few neighbors waved at her politely but quickly turned away once she passed. Daniel could sense that many of them respected her position but did not truly enjoy her constant watch. On the fifth day, a Saturday morning, Daniel was trimming the small flowers along his walkway when he heard a knock at the door. It was not a gentle knock, it was sharp, loud, and quick, like someone demanding attention. Daniel stood up, brushed the dirt from his hands, and walked slowly to the door. When he opened it, he froze for a moment. Standing on his porch were two uniformed police officers. Behind them, only a few steps away, was Karen with her familiar clipboard. Her expression was serious, and her arms were crossed. "Good morning, sir," one of the officers said politely. "Are you Mr. Daniel?" "Yes, I am," Daniel replied, his voice calm but curious. "How can I help you?" The officer glanced at Karen, then back at Daniel. "We received a call from the HOA regarding your property. The president here reported that you are refusing to follow community rules about lawn care." Daniel blinked, almost in disbelief. "You called the police, for grass?" he asked, turning his eyes toward Karen. Karen straightened her back. "It's not just grass," she said firmly. "It's about following the rules. If one person ignores them, the whole community will suffer. The rules keep our neighborhood beautiful and fair." The officers exchanged a quick look. One of them, slightly older, cleared his throat. "Sir, we just need to hear your side of the story. Are you refusing to maintain your lawn as stated by the HOA?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand the rules," he began, "but the grass by the lake isn't just lawn. It's shoreline vegetation. It prevents soil from sliding into the water. Cutting it down would harm the lake. I'm not refusing because I don't care, I'm refusing because I do care about nature and the health of the lake." The younger officer stepped closer and looked over Daniel's shoulder toward the lake. He could see the tall grass bending in the morning breeze, the water shining gently behind it. He turned back to Daniel. "That doesn't look like regular lawn grass," he admitted softly. Karen's voice rose a little. "It doesn't matter what it looks like. The rules clearly say grass must be kept under 6 inches. He's breaking the rules, and it's your job to enforce order." The older officer shook his head slightly. "Ma'am, with respect, this doesn't look like a police matter. This is an HOA issue, not a crime." We cannot force someone to cut grass, especially if it's part of the natural environment. Karen's face tightened. She tapped her clipboard quickly with her pen. So you're saying you won't do anything? You're letting him ignore the rules. The officer spoke calmly. We are here to ensure peace, not to settle disagreements about landscaping. If you want to pursue this further, it needs to go through proper civil channels, not the police. Daniel stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. He had been calm from the beginning, but inside, he felt a small relief. The officers were reasonable. They were not here to punish him for protecting the lake. The younger officer looked at Daniel once more. Sir, just keep things peaceful between you and the Hoa. We don't want this to turn into an ongoing conflict. Daniel gave a small smile. Of course, officer. Thank you for coming. The officers nodded politely and walked back to their car. Karen, however, stayed behind for a moment. Her face showed a mixture of frustration and determination. She leaned closer to Daniel and whispered sharply, "This isn't over. You'll see." Without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heels and marched away. Daniel closed the door gently and walked back to the porch. He sat down, staring at the tall grass swaying by the water. His heart was steady, but his mind was racing. If Karen was willing to call the police over grass, what would she do next? Later that afternoon, Daniel noticed a few neighbors whispering as they walked by. Some glanced at his house, some at the lake. He could tell that news of the police visit had already spread. A couple of neighbors gave him small, supportive nods, as if to say they understood. But others avoided his eyes, not wanting to be caught in the middle. As the sun set that evening, Daniel reflected on what had happened. He knew Karen would not stop. She believed she was right, and she had power through the Hoa. But Daniel also believed he was right, and his reason was stronger. He was protecting something bigger than himself. The lake shimmered quietly under the fading light. The tall grass stood firm at the shoreline, just as it always had. Daniel whispered to himself, "I'll stand firm too." And so, what began as a simple disagreement over grass was slowly turning into a deeper conflict, one that would test patience, strength, and the meaning of community. The week after the police visit was strangely quiet. Daniel woke up each morning expecting another sharp knock at the door or another loud voice demanding he cut the tall grass by the lake. But no one came. The silence felt unusual, almost too calm, like the air before a storm. At first, Daniel hoped maybe Karen had decided to let things go. Perhaps the officer's words had made her realize that calling the police over grass was too much. Maybe, he thought, she would turn her attention back to other neighborhood matters and leave him in peace. But deep inside, Daniel knew Karen was not the type to give up. His suspicion was confirmed only 3 days later when he opened his mailbox. Inside was a neatly folded letter with the Hoa's official logo on the top. Daniel carried it back to the porch, sat down, and opened it carefully. The letter was written in formal words, but the message was clear: he had been given a written warning. The Hoa stated that if he did not cut the grass within 10 days, he would face a fine. Daniel read the letter twice, then placed it on the table beside his cup of tea. He stared at the lake, the grass bending gently in the breeze, and shook his head. To him, the grass was not a problem, it was a protector of the lake. Cutting it felt wrong, no matter what the letter said. The next morning, he found another letter. This one was shorter, but sharper in tone. It reminded him that ignoring the Hoa's instructions could result in legal action. Daniel sighed. He had only lived here for a short time, yet it seemed like the Hoa was more concerned about rules than the beauty of the lake itself. Over the next few weeks, the letters kept coming. Some were left in his mailbox, others slipped under his door. Each one sounded more urgent than the last. The words changed: warning, fine, legal notice, but the message was always the same: cut the grass or face the consequences. Daniel refused. He carefully placed every letter in a folder, keeping them. By the time the third week passed, Daniel's mailbox had become a place of tension. Each day, he walked down the little stone path to open it, knowing another letter would be waiting inside. Some were printed, others handwritten, but all carried the same message: cut the grass or pay the price. At first, Daniel kept the letters neatly in a folder, hoping to build a record in case things went further. But after the 10th letter, he stopped counting. The pile grew thicker, the words grew sharper, and the tone less friendly. Daniel tried to stay calm, yet the pressure weighed heavily on his heart. It wasn't just the letters. The neighborhood itself seemed to shift. When Daniel first moved in, people often waved at him as they passed by. Children laughed near the lake, and neighbors stopped for small conversations. Now, things felt different. Some still greeted him warmly, but others avoided eye contact. He noticed whispers: two neighbors pausing by the road, glancing at his house, then lowering their voices. One afternoon, as Daniel was watering his flowers, his neighbor Clara stopped at the fence. Clara was an elderly woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She often walked her small dog around the neighborhood and enjoyed chatting with anyone who had time. "Daniel," she said softly, "I heard about the letters. Don't let it break your spirit. Not everyone agrees with how the Hoa handles things." Daniel set down the watering can and gave a small nod. "Thank you, Clara. I just want to do what's right for the lake. The grass isn't hurting anyone. It's protecting the water." Clara smiled kindly. "Some of us understand. But Karen, well, she doesn't like losing." Her words confirmed what Daniel already knew: Karen was determined to win, no matter how small the battle. The very next day, Daniel found not just a letter, but a notice taped to his front door. It stated that fines would begin immediately if he didn't act. The number printed on the page made Daniel pause. It wasn't a small fine. It was heavy enough to cause worry. Daniel folded the paper carefully and placed it on the table inside his house. For a moment, he just stood still, looking out the window at the lake. The tall grass swayed gently in the wind, just as it always had. It was a picture of calm, yet around him, everything felt unsettled. That evening, he walked along the shoreline, letting his shoes brush through the tall blades of grass. He thought about his father, who had always taught him to respect nature, not fight against it. "Nature knows what it's doing," his father once said. Sometimes, the best care is leaving it as it is. Those words gave Daniel strength now. But strength was tested each day. The letters didn't stop. The threats of fines grew louder. Neighbors divided, some siding with Karen and the Hoa, saying rules were rules, while others quietly supported Daniel, agreeing the lake should be left natural. One night, Daniel sat on his porch when his neighbor Sam stopped by. Sam was a middle-aged man who often fished in the lake during early mornings. "Daniel," Sam said in a low voice, "I don't like how Karen is treating you. I fish here all the time. That grass keeps the shoreline healthy. If they cut it, the soil will slip, and the water will turn muddy. You're right to stand firm." Daniel felt comfort in Sam's words. "Thank you, Sam. Sometimes I feel like I'm standing alone." You're not, Sam said firmly. People are just afraid to speak too loudly. But trust me, many agree with you. After Sam left, Daniel sat back and thought deeply. He realized this wasn't just about him anymore. The grass was a symbol now of nature, of fairness, of standing up against unnecessary pressure. Still, the weight of the whole letters pressed on his mind. He wondered how far Karen would go. Would she take him to court? Would she push harder with more threats? The neighborhood seemed to buzz with quiet tension. Children still played near the lake, but parents pulled them away sooner than before. Couples walking their dogs paused near Daniel's house, looked at the grass, then moved along quickly. It was as if his home had become the center of a silent storm. But Daniel did not break. Each evening, he returned to his porch with a cup of tea, letting the sound of the lake calm him. The water rippled softly, reflecting the golden sunset. The tall grass stood tall, swaying like guardians of the shore. And Daniel whispered to himself the same promise he had made before, I will protect this place. Little did he know, the battle was about to reach a new stage, one that would no longer be hidden in letters or whispers. Soon, the city itself would become part of the story. One bright morning, Daniel stood on his porch sipping tea when he noticed a white car slowly driving down the neighborhood street. Unlike the usual cars of neighbors, this one had the city logo printed on the side. The car stopped near his home, and a man in a light blue shirt stepped out, carrying a clipboard and a measuring tool. Daniel set down his cup, a feeling of unease stirring inside him. He didn't need to guess who had called the city. Karen stood a few houses away, watching closely with folded arms. Her expression showed satisfaction, as though she had been waiting for this very moment. The inspector introduced himself politely. Good morning, sir. My name is Mr. Harris. I'm here from the city. We received a complaint regarding your shoreline grass. May I take a look? Daniel nodded, keeping his voice calm. Of course. Please come this way. They walked together toward the back of the house where the lake stretched wide and beautiful. The tall grass swayed gently, reaching toward the water's edge. Birds perched on the stalks, dipping down occasionally to catch insects. The inspector stopped, studying the view carefully. He bent down, touched the grass, and wrote notes on his clipboard. Karen had followed at a distance, though she pretended to be simply out for a walk. Her eyes stayed fixed on the inspector's every move. After several minutes of quiet observation, the inspector turned to Daniel. Do you maintain this grass yourself? Daniel shook his head. No, sir. I leave it as it is. It grows naturally by the lake. I believe it protects the soil from sliding into the water. Cutting it down would harm the shoreline. Mr. Harris nodded slowly. You're correct. This is not ordinary long grass. This is shoreline vegetation, and it serves an important purpose. In fact, according to city environmental regulations, homeowners near lakes are encouraged to leave this type of grass alone. Removing it could cause erosion and water pollution. Karen's face stiffened. She stepped forward quickly. But the HOA rules clearly state that grass must be under 6 inches. He refuses to follow the rules, and it's unfair to the rest of us. The inspector turned to her politely. Ma'am, HOA rules cannot override city laws. In this case, the shoreline grass is protected. Forcing him to cut it would go against environmental guidelines. The lake's health takes priority. Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. For weeks, he had faced letters, whispers, and pressure. Now, at last, someone with authority confirmed what he had believed all along. Karen, however, was not satisfied. "So you're saying he doesn't have to cut it? That he can just leave it like this?" Her tone was sharp, but the inspector stayed calm. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Not only does he not have to cut it, but he is required to leave it as is. If the HOA continues to pressure him, the city will step in. The lake's ecosystem must be protected." Daniel's heart lifted with hope. He glanced at the lake, its water shining in the sun, and whispered silently, "Thank you." The inspector took a few more notes, then handed Daniel a copy of his report. "Keep this document, sir. If anyone challenges you again, you can show them this. It explains clearly that the grass must stay." Daniel accepted the paper with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I appreciate your time." The inspector gave a small smile. "You're welcome. It's always good to see a homeowner respecting nature." With that, he walked back to his car and drove away. Karen stood frozen, her clipboard pressed tightly to her chest. For the first time, she didn't have words ready. She turned abruptly and walked away without saying a thing. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch as usual, the report safely tucked inside his home. The lake looked more beautiful than ever. The tall grass swayed proudly, like a silent victory flag. Neighbors passed by, some whispering, some smiling quietly in his direction. Word of the inspector's visit spread quickly, and the story carried a new weight. Daniel had been right. Later, Clara stopped by with her little dog. Her eyes sparkled as she leaned against the fence. "I heard the city sided with you, Daniel. That's wonderful news." Daniel smiled warmly. "Yes, they confirmed the grass is important for the lake. I feel relieved." Clara nodded. "You should. Sometimes, it takes courage to stand firm. I'm glad you did." As night fell, Daniel reflected on the past weeks. The letters, the threats, the pressure, it had all been heavy to bear. But this moment felt like light breaking through clouds. It was a turning point, not just for him, but perhaps for the whole neighborhood. He knew Karen wouldn't give up so easily. She had lost this round, but her pride would not let her rest. Yet Daniel also knew something else: he wasn't standing alone anymore. The lake itself stood with him, and now the city had confirmed it. For the first time in many weeks, Daniel felt true peace. The quiet water shimmered in the moonlight, and the tall grass stood tall, untouched, and safe. The battle wasn't finished, but the ground beneath him felt stronger than ever. The news of the city inspector's visit spread quickly through the Lake Hoa neighborhood. By the next morning, Daniel noticed a subtle change in the way neighbors looked at him. Some smiled warmly as they passed, while others whispered among themselves, glancing toward his house. The balance of power was shifting, and Karen felt it immediately. That morning, Daniel was sitting on his porch, sipping tea, when Clara stopped by once again. Her little dog trotted beside her, tail wagging happily. "Daniel," she said softly, "I think the neighbors are finally starting to see what's been happening." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Clara nodded toward the street. "Some of them were talking last night. They know the city sided with you. They're starting to question how Karen has been handling things. People are tired of the constant letters and threats." Daniel felt a spark of hope. For weeks, it had seemed like everyone was watching silently, unsure of which side to take. Now, perhaps, the truth would finally come to light. As the days passed, more neighbors began to approach him. Some expressed quiet support, nodding as they walked by. Others stopped briefly to say, "We understand, Daniel. You did the right thing." Even Sam, the fisherman who had previously spoken with him, brought his children along one morning to wave from the dock. Their smiles were genuine, filled with gratitude and respect. Meanwhile, Karen continued her daily rounds, clipboard in hand, but her steps had lost some of their sharpness. The confident air she once carried seemed strained. Letters were still prepared in her office, but she hesitated before sending them. She noticed that some neighbors were no longer listening to her instructions as eagerly as before. Whispered conversations followed her wherever she went. One afternoon, a small group of neighbors gathered quietly at the edge of the lake. They discussed the situation openly, sharing what they had learned from Daniel and from the city inspector. One of them, a young mother named Sarah, said firmly, "We've been afraid to speak up, but Daniel was right all along. That grass is important for the lake. Cutting it would have been harmful." Another neighbor, Mr. Lopez, an older man with a small boat, added, "Karen has been so strict, and for what? The lake is part of our neighborhood. It belongs to all of us, not just her rules." Word of these conversations eventually reached Karen. She overheard bits of them as she walked down the street, and it left her unsettled. Her authority, which once felt absolute, now seemed fragile. Neighbors avoided confrontations with her, choosing instead to quietly discuss the truth. Daniel, unaware of the full extent of the gossip, continued his routine. He watered his flowers, checked on the tall grass, and sat by the lake each evening. He noticed the difference in how people looked at him. Where once there were whispers of judgment, now there were nods of respect and quiet smiles. He felt a sense of peace returning to the neighborhood. One day, Karen called a small HOA meeting at the community center. She attempted to reassert her authority, explaining the rules and emphasizing the importance of compliance. But when she looked around, she saw many neighbors shaking their heads. Some looked directly at her with polite but firm expressions. Others remained silent but clearly did not agree with her stance. Clara, who attended the meeting, leaned over to Daniel and whispered, "You're not the only one standing up for what's right. People are seeing the truth now." During the meeting, a representative from the city had been invited to speak. He reiterated that shoreline vegetation was protected by environmental laws. Cutting the grass in Daniel's yard would have violated these rules. The words were clear and final. Karen tried to argue, but the city representative's authority left no room for debate. After the meeting, the community's reaction was evident. Many neighbors spoke privately with Karen, gently but firmly questioning her approach. They pointed out the city's ruling and expressed disappointment in the way she had treated Daniel. Slowly, it became clear to Karen that her influence over the neighborhood was weakening. Daniel, watching from his porch later that day, felt a sense of vindication. The lake shimmered in the late afternoon sun, and the tall grass swayed gracefully. The battle had shifted. It was no longer just about him and Karen, it was about fairness, respect, and protecting the natural beauty of the lake. That evening, Daniel walked along the shoreline, listening to the gentle ripples of water and the rustle of grass. He thought about how long he had stood firm against the pressure, how he had faced letters, whispers, and threats. And now, at last, the truth had come out. Karen, meanwhile, walked past him silently, her clipboard empty, her authority challenged. For the first time, she was not the one controlling the neighborhood. The city had spoken, neighbors had spoken, and nature itself had spoken through the tall grass. Daniel smiled quietly to himself. The lake was safe. The tall grass was safe. And he had learned something important: standing firm for what is right, even when it is difficult, can change the hearts of those around you. He returned to his porch, feeling the warmth of the evening sun on his face. The neighborhood was still, the lake calm, and the tall grass swaying gently as if waving in quiet triumph. Daniel knew that while challenges might still come, the truth had been revealed, and for now, that was enough. The weeks after the city inspector's visit felt different to Daniel. The neighborhood that once buzzed with whispers and tension now moved with a quieter, calmer rhythm. The tall grass at the shoreline continued to sway in the wind, proud and untamed, reflecting the resilience of the lake itself. Daniel walked along the water every morning, taking in the peaceful scene, feeling a satisfaction he had not known in months. Karen, however, was not used to this calm. Her usual authority had been challenged, her letters ignored, and her complaints dismissed by both the city and many neighbors. At first, she tried to maintain her position, attending HOA meetings, handing out reminders, and speaking firmly to anyone who would listen. But slowly, she realized that her influence had weakened. Neighbors no longer whispered in fear; instead, they spoke openly, politely questioning her rules and methods. Daniel noticed the change immediately. Walking to the mailbox one morning, he saw a small group of neighbors chatting near the lake. They waved to him warmly, smiling genuinely. Clara was there, of course, giving him a cheerful nod. Even people who had avoided his house for weeks now approached him casually, thanking him for protecting the lake. One afternoon, a formal letter arrived from the HOA office. Daniel opened it with cautious curiosity. It was not a threat. It was a notice that Karen had resigned as HOA president. Her term had ended early, and the community had voted to allow a new leader to step in. Daniel read the letter slowly, letting the words sink in. After weeks of tension, letters, and threats, Karen's authority had come to an end. Relief washed over him. Not only had he won the battle for the lake, but the neighborhood itself seemed ready to heal from the conflict. The pressure, the fear of fines, and the silent judgment of neighbors all began to fade, replaced by a sense of shared respect for nature and fairness. That evening, Daniel walked along the shoreline. The lake reflected the golden hues of the sunset, and the tall grass swayed gently in the breeze. He thought about the journey that had brought him here: the letters, the threats, the police visit, and the city inspector's confirmation. It had been a long fight, but standing firm for what was right had made all the difference. A few neighbors approached, waving to him as they passed. Sam, the fisherman, called out, "You did it, Daniel. The lake is safe because of you." Daniel smiled and waved back. "We did it," he replied. "Everyone who cares about this place helped." Even Karen passed by that evening. She walked slowly, her clipboard empty, her posture less rigid. Daniel didn't speak to her; he didn't need to. Her defeat was clear, and there was no sense in reopening old conflicts. The neighborhood had moved forward, and nature had triumphed. Over the next days, the new HOA president took office, a neighbor who had always been calm, fair, and supportive of the lake. He promised to prioritize the well-being of the community and the environment. Daniel attended the first meeting and felt a sense of optimism. Discussions were reasonable, neighbors felt heard, and rules were enforced fairly. There was no more unnecessary pressure, no more letters threatening fines. Daniel returned home that evening, walking along the lake before going inside. He stopped at the edge of the water, looking at the tall grass standing proudly along the shoreline. For a long time, he simply watched and listened to the soft rustle of grass, the gentle lapping of water, the songs of birds returning to their nests. It was a moment of peace, pure and complete. Sitting on his porch with a cup of tea, Daniel reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that standing firm, even when faced with pressure, fear, and uncertainty, could inspire change. The lake had taught him patience, courage, and the importance of protecting what truly matters. Neighbors began to visit more often. Children played near the lake, parents watched with ease, and conversations flowed freely. There was laughter, small celebrations of life, and a shared understanding that the community was stronger together when respect for nature guided their decisions. One evening, Clara stopped by with her dog, smiling warmly. "You did more than protect the grass, Daniel," she said softly. "You reminded all of us that standing for what is right matters." "Thank you." Daniel nodded, feeling a gentle pride. "It wasn't just me," he replied. "It was all of us who care about this place. The lake, the grass, the neighbors, we all played a part." As the sun set behind the trees, the lake shimmered in golden light. The tall grass swayed gracefully, reflecting both the wind and the determination of a man who had stood for what he believed. Daniel watched it all and felt a deep sense of belonging, a connection to the lake, the community, and the simple truth that fairness and care can overcome even the strictest obstacles. In the days that followed, peace returned fully to the Lake Hoa neighborhood. Karen stepped back completely, the city's rules were respected, and the lake remained protected, thriving as it always had. Daniel knew that this place, with its quiet waters and tall grass, had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of resilience, community, and the quiet power of standing firm for what is right. And as Daniel sat on his porch one last evening, the lake reflecting the last rays of the sun, he whispered to himself with a smile, "Nature wins, fairness wins, and in the end, we all win." The water lapped gently at the shore, the grass swayed proudly, and for the first time in weeks, the lake and its people were truly at peace.